Welcome. My name is Sister Peggy Murphy. I'm a Dominican sister and a professor of religious studies here at Mount St. Mary College in Newburgh. We're delighted to share with you a little of our history and our walking tour. We're standing now at the building we call the Villa. It houses our administration offices now. It actually was the entire college in 1963, the year that the college opened. Our present students love to hear those stories that this tiny building housed everyone, 12 young women. Their dorms, their labs, their dining hall, everything was housed in this tiny building. And now we have 2,500 students, so we're certainly grateful for that growth and grateful to the Van Duzer family who attended our commencement some years ago. They're involved in publishing in New York City. This was their weekend home and they very graciously sold it to the sisters. So please join me inside and we'll see some of the artifacts we have. We're standing in the library room of the Van Duzer family's home. It became in 1915 the library of Mount St. Mary Academy High School, and then in 1963 the library of our college. When we built our main building, Aquinas, there was in 1963 a very fine procession, human chain as it were, of books from this site to our larger library in the main building. Students, parents, faculty, friends, with passing books hand to hand they speak about. A very beautiful part of this room, though, is research that's been done on one of the windows that is covered by a mirror. That was apparently a signal that this room may have been used as a stop on the Underground Railroad, the escape route we know from the time of slavery. So we're very delighted to consider that people walk to freedom through this property. We're hoping our students, again, are walking to freedom from liberal arts. This room was the parlor of the Van Duzer family home. It's used now for our admission office and to entertain and welcome parents and prospective students who come to view the college. The molding and this exquisite mantelpiece are symbols of a more elegant early time in architecture. We're very grateful to them for this and also for their generosity. The area here was often used in the early 19th century for recovery from TB. You may know that the only healing was to be able to be high in the mountains and receive the sun in all seasons from the vitamin D that was necessary. The first two bids on this home were for sanatorium. The third one was the sisters and the Van Duzers were very anxious that it would be a school, and so we've been blessed to be the recipients of their generosity. This is the porch of the Van Duzer family home. We've erected a plaque here to commemorate the 2006 visit of the Van Duzer ancestors, great-grandchildren, who came to our commencement ceremony. And we're grateful to them again for this opportunity for learning that they hoped would happen in this building. This was also a very favorite spot of Bishop John Dunn, the bishop, an ordinary from the Archdiocese of New York, who was a very good friend to the sisters and actually gave them the initial money for that 1915 purchase of these 42 acres. He loved this spot. He came from a very, very busy parish in New York City during the 1920s and 30s. So to sit here and observe the Highland Mountains and the Hudson River was a great gift to his spirit. He actually suffered his final heart attack here on this porch. And in his will, he noted that his funeral mass would be celebrated at St. Patrick's Cathedral, but he wished to be buried in Newburgh for his love for this beautiful spot in the Hudson Valley, and it has happened. Bishop Dunn is buried in our sister cemetery next to the Dominican Center, which we'll be seeing in a few moments. This is our main academic building, Aquinas Hall. It was named for St. Thomas Aquinas, a Dominican friar and extraordinary intellect of the Middle Ages, the patron of students. And the building has been enhanced in the last few years through a very generous contribution by Bill Kaplan, our local friend and generous benefactor who grew up in Newburgh and has supplied us with an extraordinary laboratory area for our nursing students. And so it has been named the Kaplan Math, Science, and Technology Building. You're seeing a view of the carriage house of the Van Duzer family home. Actually, their horses were housed in stalls on the lowest level. The middle were the carriages, and the upper story was the area for hay. When the sisters purchased in 1915, they turned it into a music school, and the name was Domus Angelorum in Latin, House of the Angels, for the sound of music. We still have, every few weeks, we'll have some older ladies and gentlemen stopping by to say they have fond memories of having piano lessons in this building. So it has brought joy on many levels. Today it houses history, social sciences, philosophy, and religious studies offices. We'll be able to see the interior now. Whitaker Hall is now used for offices, but when you look at these small spaces, you can actually envision the days of the carriages being pulled in here and the hay up above. The sisters again transformed it into a music school. We have this beautiful angel to remind us of its Latin name, Domus Angelorum, the House of the Angels. There were actually 17 pianos in this building at that point, and the students performed on this stage. It's also been used by Shakespearean groups that remark that it reminds them of Stratford in such an antiquated look of the stage area. This is a picture of Dr. Roland Whitaker. The building is named for him now in gratitude for his help. He served as a professor of chemistry in the early years of the college, as well as our academic dean. He was also very generous and helpful in helping with the facilitation of our licenses. He had many friends and associates at the New York State Department of Education, Board of Regents in Albany. Mount St. Mary moved from being a normal school, teacher training school, to a 2-year college, to our present status of a 4-year college. We're starting a pathway now, which we believe was the original path of the first 4 Dominican sisters who came here in 1873 and began this long history of education. When we bring our students, we ask them to please walk in silence for this section, and to use that time of quiet to pray for each other, for their families. We often say that wherever they walk in this college, they're walking on holy ground for all the goodness of the folks who have walked ahead of us. Parents, grandparents, students, faculty, staff. And the first 4 sisters, we ask them to pray to them for courage as they too now begin their journey of college experience. This peace pole was erected in 2001 in commemoration of those who lost their lives on 9/11 at the World Trade Center. Locally, we had in a small village, Washingtonville, 5 firemen who gave their lives. And so we always ask the students to pause here and pray for first responders, survivors, families that have suffered. The peace pole has the dove, symbol of peace universally, and carved on the sides in 4 languages, it proclaims, "May peace prevail on earth." In English, Hebrew, Arabic, it's a fitting place to remember the heroes in our midst. Our buildings are named for Dominican saints, and this one actually is named for our founder, Dominic de Guzman Hall. It began as a training building for the Dominican Sisters of Newburgh and was sold to the college in the 1970s. It was used for offices and then a women's dorm, and it's presently a male dormitory building. And it's named for the founder of our order. Happened in the Middle Ages. He's not as well known as St. Francis, his contemporary that people know of, but very beloved to us. He was the first to ever send the priests 2 by 2 to all the universities of Europe. The cities and universities had just started. In all of his artwork, statuary, and paintings, you'll always see this unusual piece, a dog with a torch in his mouth, a favorite of the students. I can tell you they remember this. The tale is that his mother, when she was pregnant with this child, had a recurring dream for 10 nights of a dog running with a torch in his mouth. She went to her brother, who was a priest, and they went to a physician, and he said, "Don't be worried. This child that you're carrying will have a gift for friendship, symbolized by the dog, man's best friend, and he'll bring a light to the world." And we believe that that has truly happened. So he was very beloved, never had any writings. He said, "I prefer to write on people's hearts," but a lover of education. And that has been our charism since the very beginning, training the leaders of tomorrow. He also appears with a star over his head. The story says that his godmother at his baptism looked down and saw a star, We call him a stellar man. We believe he was a star of holiness and goodness, but he's also the patron of astronomers in the Catholic tradition. The largest astronomy observatory is in the Vatican City of Rome. And so this is our beloved founder, St. Dominic de Guzman. This building began as the training building, the novitiate of the Dominican Sisters of Newburgh. This is their seal. They were called the Congregation of the Most Holy Rosary. It's a black and white cross, which was from actually Bavaria, Ratisbon, Germany, where the sisters originated, and Veritas, the motto of the order, truth in Latin. We have an amusing, maybe not such unusual story of how our sisters came to the United States. 50 years after Dominic's death, so literally early 13th century, the friars and sisters had arrived in Europe, and one was in Bavaria, southern Germany, a town called Regensburg, a beautiful monastery which is still in existence, Heilige Kreuz in German, Holy Cross Monastery. It was of cloistered sisters. We are still in contact with them. They were tried to be closed by Napoleon, but they opened a school and were allowed to stay open. They were bombed out in World War II and rebuilt and so forth. There was a priest who came from Germany to the Pittsburgh area, very German area, and he was pleased and happy in the parish, 1800s, but saw the struggles of children who were not able to speak English. He returned to his home city and visited his cousin, who was a sister in Holy Cross Monastery. He begged her to consider coming to the New World with her friends. She was understandably very reluctant because it was the Wild West, we could say, everywhere, almost like the Gangs of New York film, you know. But after some consideration and writing back for 2 years, in 1853, she ventured here with 3 of her friends. Sister Josepha Witzelhofer and 3 of her friends agreed to come. They traveled in lay clothing for 3 weeks, steamship journey. They kept an exact diary so we know what occurred, and it did not turn out as they had hoped. Many immigrants' tales, I believe. We have a contemporary stained glass window here which describes the events. Here are the 4 sisters on the dock in New York. We believe this may be Sister Josepha looking for Father Wimmer. Father Wimmer, the cousin, was to appear to receive them at the dock. The letter was lost in the mail. We jokingly sometimes refer to him as Father No-Show Wimmer, but God had his hand. They waited and waited, and finally, in desperation, they did not speak English. They called a gentleman over who could read in German. He said, "Wait here, don't be frightened." He came back shortly with his priest from Brooklyn and in a horse and cart, who said, "Please come in, I would love to have sisters." We never got to Pittsburgh, obviously. We still have that school, Most Holy Trinity, in Williamsburg, Brooklyn. So these are the first 4 sisters. Over here you can see the spire of the Regensburg Church of the Monastery of Holy Cross, the school and the church which they had so loved and knew they would never see again. They actually, shortly after arrival in Brooklyn, bought land in Amityville, Long Island, Suffolk County, and replicated this building. So I've trained in Long Island, and it's quite startling for us to travel to Germany and get out of the car and see that the exact school and church that we knew in New York is a replica of the one in Regensburg, Germany. 10 years later, numbers of women had joined them in Brooklyn, though the life was difficult. They received a letter from a priest just across the road here from our college, St. Mary's Church, notifying the sisters that there was land for sale and he would love to have Dominican sisters come to begin a school. And here they are. Our first 4 sisters are walking up the hill, the path that we just walked on together. They traveled from New York on this steamship, the SS Mary Powell. We have Powell Avenue out here named for that experience. They came with much courage, not knowing anyone, walked up the hill, and this home was available, the McAlpin family home. It was the site of the first Mount St. Mary School, elementary school, and also Mount St. Mary Academy. It was a boarding school for young women and a day school for boys and girls. And still we have many grandmothers and grandfathers in the area who have fond memories of being students at the Mount St. Mary Academy. We'll move on to our Founders Chapel our student chapel that we have in this building. We've come to Founders Chapel, our student chapel in the Guzman building. In the student chapel, we have a banner proclaiming the motto of the Dominican Order: to praise, to bless, to preach. And also over here, the motto of our college: teach me the truth, doce me veritatem. So important in the age of sound bites and so forth. And so we try to instill that message for certain in our students. You can see we have a stained glass cross which is backlit onto the campus at night. It's a reminder of the light that is stronger than any darkness, God with us. Symbols of the doves of the Holy Spirit and symbols of peace and stained glass. Here at the rear we have a triptych, which is a brief synopsis of the life of our founder, Dominic de Guzman. In the first one here on the right, you'll see Dominic as a young man. He studied at the University of Palencia, law and music. He owned 3 annotated books, a little hard for us to understand. We tell the students probably equivalent to 3 BMWs today, extremely valuable in the Middle Ages. Worked in the scriptorium, hand-done volumes. It was the time of the Black Plague. He was a young man in college, even prior to coming to the seminary, very generous. And during this very dark period in history, there was a drought, there was the terrible illness. Dominic sold his books and gave the money to the poor. He had not many quotes that we know of him, but this one's quite beautiful from his youth. The books were covered in leather, of course, and he said, "I can't keep these dead skins while living skins are hungry." So even as a young man, quite a star, quite a stellar gentleman for us. His life changed. He entered the seminary, which in the Middle Ages was to remain enclosed in a monastery. He was quite happy there, I believe. It was in the city of Osma. He grew up in northern Spain. A visit came one day which really changed his life forever. It was a family friend, Bishop Diego, who visited him and requested that he accompany Bishop Diego on a tour to Denmark. It was actually for the arranged marriage, which was almost like a business negotiation in the Middle Ages, a Castilian groom and a Danish bride. They started out, and the second night they stayed overnight. It's pictured in this window on the left. They stayed overnight in a small area in southern France called Fanjeaux. It's very symbolic and meaningful to us. Actually, each year we send 2 faculty or staff and 2 students to that village of Fanjeaux because it's where the Dominican order began, 1207, celebrating 800 years. It was approved in 1216. This is the 800th anniversary of the order. It was actually this night that began the change for Dominic's life. The gentleman who owned the inn, the innkeeper, had converted to a quite unusual religion called Catharism. It was a little difficult to understand because it was a very severe and forbidding faith that spoke about 2 deities, the god of evil and the god of good. It had many prohibitions. Music was bad, the body was bad. It was quite unusual. Thousands of Catholics had actually converted to Catharism, not because of love for that faith, but actually discouragement and scandal from abuses in the Catholic Church and the human condition. So during this time of terrible poverty and illness, sometimes the church continued to have gold, etc., and people were discouraged and had really, en masse, converted to Catharism. Dominic stayed up all night with the innkeeper. It sounds like a simple little story, but it was life transformative for him. He listened through the night, we say, not only talking, but listening to the pain of this gentleman. And the following morning, the innkeeper returned to Christianity, hopefully a happier faith and experience for him. Bishop Diego said, "You should stay here." And so the Dominican order was born. Our initials are O.P. Order of Preachers. The bishop said to him, "You have a gift for preaching. You should stay here and continue this great work," and he did. At first, and we can all appreciate this, I believe. At first, he trusted that this was the right thing to do, but as months went by, 6 people came and 5 left. You know, we've all had those kinds of experiences. Why did I think this was a good idea? That happened for Dominic. 6 months later, Bishop Diego passed away. He was alone in this place, and people were not listening, and it was not working out. One night, he went out on a small parapet, a roof in the area of Fanjeaux. Our students will be there, and our staff people this summer. And he called out to God, please, I need a sign. I need some help. He looked out, and that's depicted in this middle window. He looked out and saw a star shining over a building about a mile from Fanjeaux in a small town called Prouy. He bought that building and eventually started the first Dominican nuns. These 8 women had been Cathars, and they actually converted and became a powerhouse of prayer and support for the Dominican order. 20 years later, Dominic passed away, and there were over 1,000 Dominican priests. So the power of the sisters' prayers, the goodness of God had begun the Dominican order and all its fruitfulness, which we're still experiencing today. We're coming to our magnificent Dominican Center building. It began as the mother house of the Newburgh Dominican Sisters. Half of the building was housing the sisters convent, and the other half was the Mount St. Mary Academy. It was built in 1927 in 1 year, same as the Empire State Building. Extremely sound edifice. It was just redone a few years ago and transformed into a state-of-the-art library and dormitory facility for our students. The sisters with aging required more extensive care and have gone on to residences and nursing homes that they needed. But they maintained this particular look on the sides. Actually, this glassed-in area, or it had also been screened in the summer, were the original porches that we used again in the early 20s for TB patients. The only healing was, again, to be bundled up even in wintertime, to be out getting the vitamin D from the sun. Our nursing students are always interested to observe this porch area. This gorgeous view is the most photographed and painted view of the Hudson River. We're able to see West Point, the military reservation, from here. We do have extension classes there for enlisted personnel. Occasionally we'll have veterans on campus, a blessing. If they're not able to get the courses over there, then they'll be enrolled with our students, which always adds a great deal to our classes as well. We've come to the Kaplan Family Library and Learning Center, a state-of-the-art library and dormitory facility for our college now. It began, though, as the mother house of the Newburgh Dominican Sisters, and we have here in the foyer a very beautiful example of Middle Eastern art and tradition. It actually was a chandelier that came from the Republic of Armenia to thank our benefactor, Bishop John Donne. He was a priest in New York City following World War I. Turkey had invaded Armenia, and many Armenian refugees arrived in New York City literally with their children and their clothing. It turns out that Bishop Donne was a wonderfully generous person to them, getting apartments, getting the children schools, getting them jobs. Just an extremely generous gentleman. After his death, we received this as a gift from the Republic of Armenia, and you can see the Muslim crescent on the bottom, the Middle Eastern influence in the formation of the lights. Quite a beautiful tribute to his goodness. And helpful now, I teach Islam in the World Religions course. It's important for us to recognize others' traditions. The other interesting little anecdote, we have a very beautiful statue of St. Dominic here in the foyer, and Our Lady of Victory, Blessed Mother. This one became somewhat discolored, and a word went out, does anyone know someone who could work with marble? And we did actually not have a name that we could provide. Actually discovered the name of a gentleman who lived just 5 miles away in a small village, Wappingers Falls. He came, an elderly gentleman who had worked for many years in this beautiful craft. He saw this statue and said he certainly could help us and was glad to do it. When he was invited to come into the chapel, there was a very startling and beautiful moment for him. He came about to the middle of our chapel here and suddenly stopped and almost filled with tears. And the sister said, "Is everything okay?" And he said, "Well, you probably won't believe this. It's almost unbelievable." But he said, "Actually, I'm looking up at the very beautiful Last Supper, Michelangelo reproduction that is inset into the altar in this chapel, and he said, I actually made that with my dad 40 years ago in Italy. He said, I've never been here before, and I was right down the road and didn't realize. He said, of course, we shipped around the world, and I wouldn't have known where Newburgh, New York was when I was a young man, but I'm very glad to see the beauty of that tradition happening here. He then showed them his dad's initials, his name, that were carved into our own Last Supper. This entire edifice is quite extraordinarily beautiful. Our alums are able to be married here. We have almost one wedding a month now. But every piece of beauty practically that you see, Carrara marble, priceless beauty, our stained glass is from Munich, Germany, almost all gifts of Bishop Dunn. He had friends from around the world. He had been so good to people. He had a gift for friendship, and we've benefited so much from all of the beauty that he provided for us. This is the beautiful chapel of the Dominican Center. Catholic churches traditionally have holy water at the entrance as a reminder of baptism. It's often some simple bowls of water. Here, as you can see, two very beautiful angels of Carrara marble, gift of Bishop Dunn. Likewise, the Stations of the Cross, also a gift and imported from Italy. The windows were painted in Munich, Germany, sent here from a company in Minnesota. The art department tells us it's one of the greatest examples of red stained glass in the United States. Apparently very difficult to paint red. It needs to be mixed with gold in order not to run. So we're surrounded by beauty, truly. And again, almost all gifts of Bishop Dunn. The chapel has traditional pews, as you see in churches in the back. We have this unusual configuration here in the front. The Dominican sisters had studied in Washington, and they saw again what had been in the Dominican houses in Europe, these benches that faced each other. They're called choir to choir. The Dominican sisters and priests would chant back and forth to each other, sing back and forth to each other with the prayers. Dominic had a very beautiful statement. He said, we can bow to the God in each other as well as the God on the altar. It's a very beautiful tradition that's been maintained by this architecture. The altar, as you can see, is quite exquisite. The Michelangelo Last Supper that's familiar to us, again, is inset into the main altar. It was constructed by our neighbor. We have here in the front two very beautiful mosaics. Here, St. Dominic with the symbols of the dog, the star, done in colored mosaic. And on this side, St. Thomas Aquinas, again, lover of the Eucharist, intellect of the Middle Ages. On the altar, we have what's traditional in many churches, the Greek Alpha and Omega. God will be with us at the beginning of life and also, of course, unto the end. The corpus on the crucifix in this church is extraordinarily unique. A friend of Bishop Dunn, who was a missionary in South Africa in the 1920s, had this sent as a gift. The corpus, the body of Christ that's here, was carved from one solid piece of ivory, one elephant's tusk that was found in Africa in the 1920s and shipped here. This rose window, a gift from Bishop Dunn, and this very beautiful statue of the Blessed Mother, which has an unusual lace veil that was quite traditional of certain parts of Italy, arrived after Bishop Dunn's death. So even in death, he continued to gift us all of this Carrara marble, and the beauty of this whole edifice is really a tribute to his goodness and kindness. And we're grateful that our students can be in an atmosphere where prayer has been lifted for over 100 years. And we pray that all of those blessings continue to rest on everyone who visits us here. At Christmas time, we use this building for our extraordinary Christmas Vespers, where we listen to the Nuremberg Symphony and our student chorus. We're blessed with an extraordinary pipe organ, and also the building was constructed with excellent acoustics. No microphones needed for the beauty of the sounds here. Ave Maria, are grateful for the sacrifices of past generations at the Mount, and also now for the privilege that we have of fostering hope in future generations of students. As we continue our Dominican tradition, we pray that our students, faculty, and staff will continue to be compassionate and generous citizens who go out with joy to serve in our communities.